Good evening and welcome to this special conversation. India has taken a massive leap with GST 2.0, but what do these reforms really mean for the economy, for businesses, and most importantly, for the common man? At a time when India has just undertaken the biggest rehaul of the GST, we have with us a special guest, Sanjeev Sanyal, a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, a person who wears multiple hats, but I'm going to stick to economy today, and also a historian, somebody who's read widely, somebody whose work has brought fresh perspectives to India's past and also present. Mr. Sanyal, thank you so much for
Pleasure to be here, Vasudha.
Yeah. Mr. Sanyal, I saw your interviews and you have used this word process reform for GST 2.0, and you say that this is not to kickstart or boost consumption, but it is to put in place an efficient system. How are you so sure that it's going to bring tangible benefits to the common person in the country?
So what you have to understand is the distinction between a structural reform and what a process reform is. You see, everybody loves grand structural reforms, introduce the GST. That was a structural reform. Or the original reforms of 1991, we changed from a socialist system to a market-based system, or introduce the insolvency and bankruptcy code, or shift our monetary policy to an inflation targeting system. Now, those are all structural reforms because you have changed the structure of whatever that activity was. So when you introduce GST, you fundamentally change the structure of indirect taxes in India. Here, that's not what we are doing. We're taking the system, but we are doing a process reform in terms of making the existing system more efficient. So what have we done? We have basically, first of all, taken all the slabs, first of all, reduced them to 2, but very importantly, gone back to first principles and taken all the items and slotted them in what is a more logical place for them to be. For example, we used to have cement at 28. Now everybody argued, why is it there? Well, the reason it was there is not because of some great thinking that was done, but simply that it equated to whatever existed in the pre-GST period. Yeah. You slotted it in just because it was the least disruptive way of moving to a new system. But because you had this not necessarily sort of worked out way of putting things in various slabs, first of all, you had lots of slabs, and then you would end up with these rather arcane debates about what to tax salty popcorn vis-a-vis sweet popcorn and things like that. Now, these debates will happen because the system is not set up logically to equate to anything but what existed pre-GST. Right. So what we have done now is taken the system and rationalized it. Now, even if you didn't know, you didn't have the booklet which tells you what is in which slab, by just from common sense, you would broadly be able to tell what item is in which bucket, right? Now that is a major efficiency gain. To a large extent, it gets rid of the inverted structure problem as well, not entirely, but to a large extent. And very importantly, we have done a whole bunch of process changes as well. So for example, in a creeping sort of way, a sort of Inspector Raj had come back into the registration process. We understood that, so a new process system has been created by which at least 97% of the registration should happen within 3 days. So all of this is taking the same framework and cleaning it up. Right. And while doing this does mean that you may get a one-time boost in sales because the rates have by and large come down, it does, the real benefit to it is not about this one-time boost. The real benefit is from the fact that you made the whole system less friction, having less friction, and made it more productive. Because the game really is to get the whole system to work faster, become more buoyant, become more efficient, let the economy grow faster, and consequently, therefore, to be able to fill up some fiscal hit we may take in upfront. Right.
So then, Mr. Sanyal, how do you look at this criticism, especially by the opposition, that this has come too late and it's too little? Would you agree with the fact that we've also lost some time, some precious time, in bringing about these changes in the original design?
Well, I mean, one can always argue we should do it earlier. I mean, those who are making this case should have then done it in their own time. Fact is that it was done in 2017, now 8 good years ago. It took about 2 years to stabilize the system. And by the way, India is one of the few countries where it stabilized that fast and didn't end up causing a regime change, by the way. Then, having stabilized it by 2019, we then went through 2.5 years of fair amount of economic trauma because of the COVID shock. Then at the end of that, we were recovering from it. So again, don't disturb it, please. So it's only in 2024 that we began to feel confident that, look, let's go for it. And you will remember the late Bibek Debroy also on publicly making the case that, look, we need to have fewer slabs. And I have also publicly stated before that we need fewer slabs. So it's not some new thing that we didn't know we had to do. The question is when to do it. So about a year ago, we began to look into this seriously. And here we are. We have reduced them to 2 levels. We can always argue we should do it earlier or whatever. But here we are, and we have done it. And those in the opposition who think it should have been done earlier and that this has been done because of their advice, I hope they remain in the opposition and keep giving us good advice.
Mr. Sanyal, revenue losses seem to be a point that a lot of these opposition states are making. We just had the Punjab finance minister making the same point. What would you suggest to the center to ensure that states don't get shortchanged?
Look, when you reduce rates and rationalize them, there would have been a one-time reduction in taxes. This is one of the reasons, incidentally, why we didn't do it as quickly as possible, because we were unclear whether coming out of COVID, fiscal systems were strong enough to do it. So you can't claim that it should have been done earlier and then say, oh my God, you are going to cause us a fiscal loss. There will be a fiscal loss if you rationalize downwards, which presumably is the plan. Nobody was arguing for rationalizing upward, I'm assuming. So if you're rationalizing downward, you will see an upfront cost. The idea, of course, is that the economy becomes more efficient, grows faster, and that you then make up for the one-time loss with the momentum of the economy and the buoyancy. So that's basically what we are arguing for, and I don't think anybody is arguing that this is consequently a bad thing.
Mr. Sanyal, you've been highlighting the compliance aspect of GST 2.0. Compliance would mean faster registration and also these partial refunds. Who would this benefit? Would it benefit the exporters and also MSME? And what kind of tangible benefits?
So generally speaking, it benefits everybody. Making the system making it friction-free benefits everyone. But typically, this sort of thing hurts the MSMEs most, because typically you're dealing with somebody with one company which is just about getting registered, he can't even get going, whereas an existing large company already has a phalanx of chartered accountants who do this sort of thing, and even if things are delayed somewhere, they probably have a subsidiary somewhere else where that can get things going. So really the benefit happens to be the greatest to MSMEs, right, but everybody benefits.
So talking about MSMEs, I come from Tamil Nadu, and there's a lot of uncertainty amongst manufacturers, especially garment manufacturers. Similar concerns have been raised by shrimp farmers and the diamond merchants of Gujarat, and this is all to do with the US tariffs. How do you expect India to navigate the situation? I know that the rhetoric has toned down in the last few days. We also saw the Prime Minister respond to Donald Trump's tweet, but do you expect the situation to get better in the coming days?
So look, as we emerge as a global power, you have to get used to the fact that other countries, existing powers, including those who purport to be our friends, will be uncomfortable about it. So first thing we need to do, if we genuinely believe in being a world power, we first of all need to develop a bit of a thicker skin. And as you have seen in this particular episode, we have not escalated the matter, but we have stood our ground. And I think at some point in our history, we will have to do this. Now, if we cannot do it at a position when our economy is growing at least in the first quarter, by 7.8%, there's no particular emergency, our banks are in good shape, inflation is in decent shape, oil prices are in decently low. If in this moment in history we are unable to stomach a punch or two, then we'll never be able to do it. So if there is any moment in history we could have sort of stood our ground, this has got to be it, so we have done so. And I think we have done the right thing. Now, that does not mean that some parts of our system will not take some heat. And let me say, wherever possible, we will provide them support. We do have the fiscal and monetary space for doing it. This GST change also helps some of them. For example, the textiles guys some of their inversion has been removed. So let's see, as things pan out, we will provide whatever support is to be needed.
Right. Mr. Sanyal, talking about China, it looks like we could be normalizing ties with China soon. What kind of impact would that have on Indian economy, considering that our trade deficit with China remains quite significant?
So the trade deficit with China has been an issue for a while. And of course, we have things like Press Note 3 and so on, various restrictions we had put in place after Galwan. So we will have to see how this pans out. Fact is that while as a country we may not want to join things like RCEP, it also is true that we cannot wish China away. They are the world's largest industrial power. Even if we want to become an industrial power, a lot of the inputs will come from there for the time being, and maybe even into, even into the longer future, there'll be segments where there will be an important supplier. I mean, we can be a great generics manufacturer of medicines, but, the inputs come from China. So, and this idea that we can protect everything and manufacture every single thing at home may not quite work out. Even if we may want to, at least the key chokeholds we may want to protect, you cannot wish away China from the equation. So a normalization with China over time is in our interest as well.
Also, sir, well, in that case, given that there have been global headwinds and there have been these shocks that we've been getting, and many countries are witness to this, what kind of policy framework does India need so that our economy becomes quite resilient to, adjust and adapt to these kind of shocks?
Well, you could spend the whole evening discussing various things, but I think you can put them in the general bucket of ease of doing business and ease of living. Basically, what has happened is that while we can still do some very large structural changes which we can discuss, and particularly you need to probably do major structural changes in the judiciary and speed that system up. But on the government policy front, the bulk of the big structural changes are probably done. There are some more that we can discuss, and I have some ideas on that. But a lot of what we need to do is really getting rid of friction. And so therefore, I keep talking about process reforms all the time, to the irritation of other people maybe. But I do want to make sure that the point is, we may need to do maybe half a dozen large structural reforms, but the real game is doing the thousands of process reforms. And when I say process reforms, what am I talking about? I'm talking about, some act, rule number 43C, subsection D, 3 words have to be changed. Now, the economy at large may not care about those 3 words, but there's some sector that does care about those 3 words. Right. And somebody has to do this excruciating business of going there and pulling those out. I have signed up for doing this, as you may be aware, so I have been working on this, but the good news is now it is getting more institutionalized. Just a couple of weeks ago, the government announced that a committee has been put in place for deregulation with former cabinet secretary, now member of Niti Aayog, Rajiv Gaubaji, in charge of that. So, a systematic effort towards doing these myriad process reforms is being made.
Right.
And there are other things that need to be done as well.
Talking about committees, there was a task force that the Prime Minister announced on Independence Day. This is to expedite bureaucratic reforms, to streamline bureaucracy. You've had some radical views on that, and a lot of us agree with you on the fact that the bureaucracy needs a lot of changes. What kind of governance changes do you think the country needs at this point of time?
So this is a huge topic. We could spend the whole evening talking about it, but at a very broad level, there are a few things we need to do. First of all, I think we need to think through the structure of the government in the following way. I have been doing some work on this, and my preliminary findings is that perhaps the Union Government of India is not as bloated as people think. My own sense is that it may in fact be too small. The problem is that the distribution of that bureaucracy is wrong. there are some very major areas of the government where we have too few people. For example, we have not enough people in, say, things like cybersecurity, or food safety, or even archaeology and museum protection. Municipal services, of course, that's not a central government activity, but still, if you're taking a more local government, not enough people in municipal government. So, in fact, the Indian government may not be too bloated, but it's all in the wrong place.
Right.
Meanwhile, we may have way too many people in certain other areas. I mean, I discovered that we have some 3,600 gazetted officers in the Geological Survey of India. Now, I have nothing against geological surveys or geology, which I think is a very useful thing. But one could argue that having 3,600 gazetted officers, and plus there are many non-gazetted officers as well, may be a bit too much for an institution that is should be relatively slim and trim.
Right. One of my last questions to you, Mr. Sanyal. You've spoken about the demographic potential of the country, and you sound concerned, and this is something that's been echoed by a lot of chief ministers, experts. What should India do to get this right? Because we've seen the examples of several countries who are facing the challenge of aging population.
So we haven't aged yet, but we need to begin to think about this, because while we are in the demographic dividend phase for the next 25 years, do remember what this actually means. The reason we have just entered this demographic dividend phase is because 25 years ago, we had the peak in the number of children born. Since then, the number of babies born in this country has actually declined. I think if I'm not wrong, we had 29 million kids born in India in 2001. That was the peak. Today, that number has fallen to about 22 million, so dramatic decline. We have a total fertility rate of about 1.9 and still declining, which is below the replacement rate. It is only at 1.9 because a couple of states like UP and Bihar happen to still have reasonable high birth rates, but even those are declining. But there are parts of the country where birth rates look like East Asia. And those states have begun to complain about the fact that they are seeing demographic changes because of migration from the north. But let me say, it may not last very long because those declines in fertility are also happening in the north. So rather than complain about this inflow of workers from the north, I think the south and the west as well, but in fact, interestingly, West Bengal too, which happens to have almost Korean birth rates in urban Bengal, you need to begin to think about how to at least ramp up birth rates. Now, let me warn you about one problem here, that no country in the world which has seen a decline in birth rates has been able to bring it back ever up past replacement rate. So if we manage to do it, we'll be unique. But at the very least, we need to shut down all these population control programs which still seem to hang around in our bureaucracy. In fact, since you mentioned in our earlier question, what are the things to shut down in the government? Well, every kind of population control program in this country needs to be shut down now.
Are they still working across the country?
Yeah, they are all embedded in various ways in the system. You see, it's like this. Once you create a bureaucracy, it stays alive. We are now 30 years into being a market-based economy, but half the things I'm fighting are all structures that were, and laws and rules created in the socialist period, some even in the colonial period. So once you create a bureaucracy, it stays alive. This is not true of just India. The one-child policy was removed in China relatively recently. This is 30 years past when it was obvious they had to do it, and almost half a century past their peak in the number of children. So even in China, once the bureaucracy, you had given somebody targets to reduce birth rates, they kept doing it till well past where it made any sense. And every economist and demographer worth their salt was screaming that, look, this makes no sense. Why are you continuing with a one-child policy?
Right.
But it still went on for 2 extra decades. So you have to go into our systems, and we go into our medical systems, for example, we have actually still all kinds of incentives for doing hysterectomy, tuberectomy, and all kinds of birth control things. I am okay with women making fair choices about it. But if we have a government program that actually promotes it and particularly gives incentives to doctors for carrying out these things and encouraging it, then, then at the very least, you should get rid of them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Sanyal. On that note, thank you so much. That's something to think about. Sanjeev Sanyal, on the importance of making policy that touches people's life and benefits them. Thank you so much, Mr. Sanyal.
Thank you.